Hey, it's Drybear. I know it's been a while, but I'm back again with another class popularity video for Lost Ark. So let's jump into what November's class popularity looks like. But first, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Who knows? I might even be streaming right now. A quick disclaimer before we get started, I have to do this every single time, but these are not perfectly accurate. It is impossible to get perfectly accurate popularity, class popularity numbers for the game when there is no public API, right? So it's me as an individual player, as a user, using my experience as a game developer, having pulled stats for many years, looking at how popularity works, and just playing the game myself and using the in-game auction house. So it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing, because right now we have nothing. And the short synopsis on how I do it is I use the auction house based on how people are trading and acquiring gear for classes in the game. There's some pitfalls to this. Obviously, if you have your main, you haven't bought gear, then there's going to be a downturn in that. But hopefully, law of large numbers means that we're approaching a general approximation of what the class popularity is for Lost Ark. And I've done everything that I can to remove bots from the equation and look only at the high end of tier 3 characters for class popularity. So you'll see on screen the class popularity for November. And I think what's interesting too is we've been tracking the patterns of these classes since launch. I know I missed a couple months because I did take a 2-month break from Lost Ark to play other games and catch up on the general industry. But we can see that most of the classes are generally where they were, except for a few. There's some shocking classes in here that we'll get into. Now, keep in mind, some of the newer classes like Destroyer, Arcanist, and Machinist have had less time to build up their progression to be able to show presence in later tier 3 with Legion rating and things like that. However, it doesn't seem to be that much of a limiter. We saw the Arcanist jump up in popularity and the Glavier jump in popularity. Even though they were brand new, people had less progression on them. They were very popular at first and shot up in popularity. Glavier started out as one of the most popular in the game and has maintained that top third of the popularity for classes ever since that it was released. Arcanist started exceptionally high and then slowly fell down. Destroyer started at the bottom and has been lingering there, and Machinist actually is shockingly unpopular. And I think it might be why they're doing every other class gets more promotion and more free stuff. Maybe they're, they're walking that logic back a little bit, since, the player base is kind of solidified now, and they're not worried about trying to, obviously they're worried about returning players and keeping their active players, but in general they're less frantic because they've kind of gotten into their core player base now. So at the top, the undefeated queen is Sorceress. This has been Sorceress since the game launched, and it has never changed. Sorceress has always been in the first place and has not lost that spot any month that I've been doing this or any time I've looked at these numbers. For Western players, Sorceress is just the most popular. Now, typically we do see Deathblade and Berserker fight for second and third, but over the last 3 months or so, we've actually seen Berserker start to fall. Let me know what you think in the comments, why this is. Maybe people are just getting frustrated with how Berserker plays in, clown content and Vicus content. A lot slower, longer locked animations. You can get picked off and have that floor POV and die a lot easier than some of the other classes, and maybe just over time people have gotten bored, or maybe this is a representation of people having their Berserkers geared out, and so my method is limited in finding people that have already solidified. Though you could argue then why would Sorceress always be the first if people had already locked their Sorceress in, and that was a major concern. So Deathblade being third place, but in a shocking turn of events, Gunslinger has shot up in popularity over the last few months in the fall. Gunslinger has kind of been in the top 5, dropping down some, raising up some. When Vulcan came out, Gunslinger dropped down. When Vicus came out, it came back up. And with Clown, it seems like Gunslinger is kind of climbing up again. Maybe people are more comfortable with the end game PvE content, and they're willing to try something like Gunslinger, because Gunslinger does require a lot more from you. You have more to think about, more abilities, more things to weave together. Your positioning matters more because you're very squishy. and you have locked animations like most range characters. So maybe people are wanting that extra challenge now that they feel they're very comfortable with the core game. Again, let me know what you think down below. Now, the big shocker here, pun intended, I guess, is Scrapper. Scrapper has shot up significantly in the last 3 months. We started the game in February with Scrapper being in the bottom 3, bottom 4. It was actually one of the least popular classes in the Western release, and it stayed that way through the early summer. We saw a slight uptick in Scrapper play towards midsummer, but we didn't see anything until the balance changes were announced in Korea for Scrapper, and even then she only went up a couple places. Maybe people have adjusted to that, or maybe her being more powerful or more effective or more attractive, I don't know. But Scrapper actually being picked up here is super interesting. Top 4. I didn't think a class like Scrapper, which honestly isn't isn't as glam or as mass popular, mass appeal as some of the other classes would be. I'm shocking to see a class like Scrapper in the top 4, but Scrapper has just shot up in popularity ever since. And out of curiosity, I looked at the difference between the 2 specs as well. And with Scrapper, it actually turns out to be pretty close to 50-50 between Taijutsu and Shock Training, which is surprising to me as well. I mean, Taijutsu, I think, is a little bit more accessible. It's a little bit easier to play. It's a little bit faster and gives you more freedom of movement. Whereas Shock Training, with your chain destruction, your death rattle, there's a lot of abilities that you have long animations on, and so you can get punished. And sometimes it's not that Shock Training overall is complicated, although sometimes it can be challenging to manage your 2 resource bars. It's more just being able to constantly get your abilities off without having to cancel them early in order to reposition. That's the hardest part about Shock Scrapper. So Shock Training and Taijutsu being about 50-50 is surprising to me, but pretty cool on that front. Then we have Shadow Hunter underneath Scrapper in the 5th slot. Shadow Hunter, like Gunslinger, has gone up and down. She hasn't really ever gotten back to the launch popularity. But her coming up and actually beating Berserker, this might be the first time we've ever seen Shadowhunter beat Berserker in popularity. So that's interesting as well. We obviously don't have the cool transformations yet, but it could be on the horizon, or maybe people just, it's a very common archetype that people like. Following Shadowhunter, we have Berserker, then Glavier. Glavier is about where she has always been, minus her launch month. I think people just are attracted to the polearm halberd wielding class. And the next surprise comes with the climb of Striker and War Dancer. For some reason, War Dancer more popular in NA East, and then about mid to bottom list popular in Europe, South America, that sort of thing. But for some reason in the last few months, maybe it could also just be the people that were in Lost Ark for a season. They weren't really, the core player base. Those people had been influencing the popularity significantly. And now that, we're going into the fall and it's more core player base that are still playing, obviously new players are still coming in every day. But yeah, War Dancer and Striker coming up is shocking. Actually seeing Striker above War Dancer. Typically we've seen War Dancer higher, but they've come up past the halfway point to even push down the Gunlancers and the Paladins and the Bards. Speaking of which, Gunlancer, Paladin, and Bard are slightly lower than they were. They usually sit around 7th, 8th, 9th position. Gunlancer usually a little bit lower. Gunlancer being higher than Paladin and Bard is shocking as well. But this, again, could be a phenomenon of people having their main Paladin Bard already locked in, and then they're not gearing new ones. And so, maybe that fringe is bigger for support. We did see a big uptick in support when we had Vulcan come out, and then again when we had Vicus. Although since I wasn't doing it last month, this popularity stuff, I'm not really sure what happened with Clown. But after Vicus, we saw a downturn. It seems like that downturn has continued for Paladin and Bard. Maybe people just have them in their rotation and they're expanding their roster to, more characters that aren't support, or maybe we've kind of hit that maximum threshold. Obviously, if you want one group of 4 to have a support in it, then you'd want the combination of Paladin Bard popularity to be about 25% for 1 and 4. And right now it's about 10%. So I think in general, you probably would like to see these numbers higher. Paladin Bard were higher, but maybe people just, or maybe the Paladins and the Bards players aren't making alts. Or if they are, they're just making more Paladins and Bards. I don't know. But seeing these drop is a little discouraging, but we'll see. You know, I'm guessing we'll get Artist in the spring time, maybe like April or May for Artist, and then we'll see kind of how that affects things. But that's the middle of the pack. And then moving on to the bottom section, we have Artillerist, which is about, Artillerist started low and then slowly started creeping up and has been lingering here in position 14 or 15 basically the whole time. I think it's also just one of those classes that is very niche. It's going to attract a specific audience of people that like playing it, but maybe they haven't drawn to it as much. Maybe it's a little too slow. Maybe it's a little too big brain for them in the positioning, or maybe they just don't like playing gunners in general. We'll see if Artillerist comes up once we finally get the balance changes that will allow them to split the builds between firepower and barrage. I know people are still on the fence about those changes, but it does make the two builds more distinct and more specific. So you can be more nuke dropping Artillerist, or you can be more invested in transitioning into your barrage mode and make that more effective, rather than both builds having to do both all the time. So we'll see how that affects the popularity, or if it does anything at all. Following the Artillerist is the Destroyer, and this is higher. Destroyer started low and has been slowly creeping up, like here and there, 0.1%, just pushing up and climbing. Maybe it's just a great class that people like is their alt. I know there are a lot of diehard Destroyer mains, but yeah, I think, again, just like Artillerist and some of the other classes, they're getting big changes. We'll see if that changes once the balance comes in that makes it so you can specify Rage Hammer or Gravity Training. The Gravity Training changes specifically make it really interesting, because then you can actually stay in that form for longer and build around it. Following Destroyer is Arcanist in the 16th or the 15th position there. This one started high, and I think everyone that had played in other regions saw this one coming. Arcanist is a little obtuse, a little bit challenging to play, and can be quite grating, especially if you're someone who is passionate about DPS. Having a big portion of your DPS being contingent on RNG randomness can be quite frustrating, because then you might get your group gets a good pull, but you got bad RNG, or vice versa. You have the perfect cards, and then it's a wipe reset on your pull, and you get frustrated. So it's definitely kind of the challenge with Arcanist. I'm guessing, I did a little theory crafting when they announced the changes, but since they haven't pushed the balance changes live yet, I'm curious how the new changes to Arcanist will affect that, with some of the, get another card that you just had, and then having some of the Emperor changes and things like that for Arcanist, but I guess we'll see. Soulfist has come up slightly, or I guess it's more accurate to say that Machinist has lifted the other unpopular classes up a little bit. Soulfist and Sharpshooter at the bottom of the list here. They like the trifecta has always been Soulfist, Sharpshooter, Deadeye. Those three classes in almost every region in perpetuity have been the least popular classes in the entire game. They just don't attract people. Either it's the gameplay, or it's how they look, or how they feel, or the vibe, or whatever it is. These three classes have always been at the bottom. Soulfist, I think, got a small bump when they made Energy Overflow more viable, because the Robust Spirit build, boy, you have to have a high tolerance to play it, because it can be quite frustrating. You need your Spirit Bombs to land. If they don't land, you miss out on a significant portion of your DPS. If your timings are weird, it just, and you need a lot of spec too, and a lot of gear to make it work, which isn't really an issue anymore. Sharpshooter, same thing. Sharpshooter has always been towards the bottom. I think he's just a little too vanilla and just doesn't have that pizzazz that people look for, down towards the bottom. And then Machinist, just above Deadeye, which honestly isn't a good bar to shoot for, but for whatever reason, you would think that Machinist would be similar to Shadowhunter. If this list is reflecting alt-centric behavior, which I don't know how much it actually is, You would think Machinist would be higher because Machinist is just like Shadowhunter. If you do the evolutionary versus, you know, demonic impulse, Shadowhunter and Machinist, they're excellent alts. They're easy to gear. They only need 2 gems. You can get them really high and do a lot of damage with them. But Machinist just, you know, it didn't strike a chord with too many people, I guess. You still see them. I still see them in my groups and I still see them around. But I guess overall popularity wise, Machinists just haven't been gangbusters. And then at the very last is the poor Deadeye. We love Deadeyes. They have incredible damage, a massive kit, very useful. They're just hard to play and very punishing. They're basically the melee version of Gunslinger. So you are just as squishy, but you have to get very, very close. Actually, the closest of all the back attack classes, because Deadeye has modifiers for the shotgun abilities that make it so you have to be point blank, like nuts to butts in their butthole, as close as you possibly can be in order to get the bonus, not just in their back range, but right up against them. And I think just from that standpoint, it can be a little much for people. But obviously, I think they're both hard to play, and Gunslinger's at the very top. So people like playing Gunslinger from a distance. They just don't like playing Deadeye up close, shotgun-wise. Quite unpopular. But that'll do it. That is the popularity list for November. Again, these are my own personal calculations just based on experience and, you know, my own, I guess, at this point, calculation, my own formula. Since there isn't really any other way to get this data, and there's no way to perfect it in any way, but this video is meant to be kind of fun and interesting. Everyone's, you know, it seems like people have liked it every month. So I kept doing it. So I'm kind of waddling my way back into Lost Ark. I'll probably start making some more content for it. But I wanted to get this video out because I know people were asking for the November version and people love class popularity. So if you haven't already, check out my gameplay channel, Drybear Plays on YouTube. I post daily gameplay videos there of all the games that I play. And if you like to watch live, you can catch me live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Drybear every single day, playing Lost Ark and much, much more. And we'd love to have you over there, okay? Cheers, enjoy. Let me know what you think. If anything shocked you or surprised you, down in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.